funding from the United States has been making possible many aspects, if not virtually all of those aspects, of unrestricted warfare against our country. The money comes in part, of course, from trade, unbalanced trade that has benefited the Chinese enormously. But it also has come from our capital markets, the financial center of the world, in fact, and money that has sluiced to Chinese companies from Wall Street originates generally from the pension funds, the mutual funds, the exchange-traded funds, the index funds, and the other investment vehicles that portfolio managers on the New York Stock Exchange and others have elected for quite some time now to divert, in part, to the Chinese Communist Party, in the process making very substantial fortunes for many of those masters of the universe on Wall Street, but also in the process, two things. One, of course, helping to underwrite the Chinese Communist Party itself and its various activities, including not least those of the military-related companies of China, those working directly or indirectly for the People's Liberation Army. And to be clear, basically every company does that to some extent, because under Chinese law, it is the obligation of every Chinese company, every Chinese individual for that matter, to do the bidding of the party and to support civil-military fusion, as Xi Jinping has called it. The other feature of this, of course, is that it has put in jeopardy the billions of dollars that have emanated from American portfolios. In some cases, corporate, in some cases, those of universities and colleges and other institutions, but also, to a very considerable degree, those of individual Americans who are relying on such funds for their retirement or their children's education or for other purposes, perhaps vital to their personal well-being and maybe even their survival. And unbeknownst to them, these funds have migrated and are actually being used, at least in part, to build weapon systems that the People's Liberation Army is deploying for the purpose of killing us. The old-fashioned kind of warfare, not the pre-kinetic, unrestricted kind, not even the people's warfare kind of all of society, but actually the old-fashioned kind, the shooting kind. And this will be a very bad day if that kind of warfare eventuates on top of everything else. And we've discovered to our horror that we have enabled it, thanks to what Wall Street has done and what it has done with the acquiescence, if not actually the enabling of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the federal regulatory agency that oversees Wall Street and establishes the lines within which it must operate, along with, of course, the Congress and the security laws that it adopts. We have a panoply of securities regulations. And what this particular program is going to focus on is what happened in May of 2013 and in the years since that has given rise to an egregious situation in which our monies have been applied by the Chinese communists for these nefarious purposes on a sweetheart basis, a privileged basis, a basis in which they uniquely get to ignore the securities laws and regulations of the United States. This was pursuant to a memorandum initiated between the Security and Exchange Commission's Public Company Oversight, Accounting Oversight Board, PCAOB, and its Chinese counterpart back in May of 2013 with the aggressive assistance of then Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden. And by some estimates, the result of this sweetheart deal, this privileged access, no American company can legally ignore securities laws and regulations, of course. No other company elsewhere around the world can do it either. Only the companies of our mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party. We're going to talk about this extraordinary, anomalous, bizarre, some would use even stronger terms, and will in the course of this program, to describe this memorandum of understanding and the fact that it continues to operate under the chairmanship of Paul Atkins, the relatively recently anointed chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. To set the stage for this conversation with some of our finest national security-minded experts on the Chinese Communist Party and, well, this security of our country more generally, we're going to have, with the permission of our friend Gordon Chang, and I hope the support of our friend Maria Bartiromo, a clip from an interview they conducted yesterday, as we speak, on Maria Bartiromo's Fox Business program, Mornings with Maria. It is a fascinating insight into the problem that we will explore in detail and its implications for you. Let's go to the video of Gordon and Maria.
I also spoke with the Securities and Exchange Commission Chairman Paul Atkins this week. We met on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and we talked about disclosures. He wants to make it easier for companies to go public. But when talking about disclosures, I asked him about disclosures from Chinese companies that are traded on U.S. exchanges. Watch this. So if a stock is on one of the entity lists in America, should an American investor buy that company?
Well, we have, those sorts of things, the Treasury and the Defense Department and whatnot that put out lists of firms that are under sanctions or whatever. But so those are obviously cases that under a law, they're treated differently. I'm talking about other sorts of, foreign private issuers that, again, have a different type of setup where they are incorporated outside of China. Operations are still there or somewhere else, in Asia. And then, their primary listing are here in the U.S.
Gordon, I think we hit on a very, very specific vulnerability here in this whole relationship. I mean, if you've got Chinese companies that are sanctioned already and on Pentagon entity list, how do you make the case that it's okay for an investor to buy that stock?
Well, you can't. And you asked an important question of the SEC chairman, and the SEC chairman did not give you an answer. Clearly, if a company poses a national security threat to the United States that is so serious that it's on the Commerce Department's entity list, which means no American can deal with it without permission, then of course it shouldn't be traded on American exchanges. Because basically, we're financing companies that we say are a threat to the United States and to the American people. I don't understand how we can permit that.
Yeah, which is why we did an entire series of specials on Fox Nation called Underwriting the Enemy, which is what we're doing. We're underwriting the enemy. But Gordon, you know, President Trump has said before, look, I don't want to put China out of business. I don't want to destroy China. I'm not going to. And this is a huge piece of business for Wall Street firms. I mean, if you go ahead and take these companies that are Chinese companies off of the exchanges in America, you're removing the deepest, most liquid capital markets in the world for China. And that's going to be a very significant move should President Trump ever do that. And it certainly is going to be a very significant move to take away that business from Wall Street as well.
Well, certainly it is, but we got to remember that these Chinese companies are working and cooperating actively with the Chinese military under this doctrine of military-civil fusion, and so these are companies that are helping to kill Americans. I know it's a difficult issue for Wall Street, but ultimately we can't send men and women into battle and say, oh, by the way, we finance the bullets that are being shot at you.
Right.
It's just absolutely wrong.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, my
wrong.
family has, you know, shares in the company that makes that gun that is pointing at me right now. It's just unbelievable. Gordon, thank you. Great analysis as usual from you. Good to see you.
I want you to reflect on what the Securities and Exchange Commission Chairman Paul Atkins said to Maria Bartiromo. It wasn't just a non-answer. It was basically gobbledygook. It was blowing smoke. He did not want to address the very important, very pointed question that was put to him. Should companies, among others, that are blacklisted by the Pentagon and something known as the 1260H list, as Chinese companies operating in the United States, be allowed to engage in transactions, whether they're listed on our exchanges or they're simply trading there, and thereby be funded by American investors? The answer, I think, certainly for the Committee on the Present Danger China, and I suspect any sensible American would be, no, we don't want to be doing that. So we're going to explore what it means that we are doing that that is an ongoing arrangement. And while the Securities and Exchange Commission Chairman has talked about applying more scrutiny to these Chinese companies, and thereby signaling that he proposes to tighten up in some way on what they're doing in our markets. The bottom line is, as long as this memorandum of understanding remains in place, whether it's been amended or not, we can discuss, but as long as it remains in place, we've got a problem. And we're going to talk first by video with a man who has spent much of his professional life serving our country, both in the uniform of the United States Army and as an undercover operative of the Central Intelligence Agency. His name is Charles Sam Faddis, and he has distinguished himself, I believe, by both that service, of course, but also in what he has done since he came in from the cold, as it were, to continue to serve the American people by raising the alarm about what is being done, in some cases in their name, in other cases at their very considerable expense. I had a chance to interview Sam in the course of taping a program with him for our show, Securing America, on Real America's Voice. And we're going to play the clip from that program, part of it, and encourage you to listen intently to what Sam is saying about what is going on here. And again, what it might mean for you personally, as well as for our country. Let's go to the video with Sam at this point.
This entire situation I could best characterize as insane, right? We are already at war with the communist Chinese. They are in and out of our critical infrastructure. They're doing any number of things that you and I have talked about ad nauseum already to weaken us, tear down our society. And they are running flat out to prepare for a conventional war with the United States. So here are these guys, our number one enemy on the planet, who wish our demise. And while we are struggling and failing, actually, to keep up with things like the naval race with them, to build enough ships to confront them in the Pacific, here we are pumping money into communist China. So we're basically paying for the planes, ships, artillery, and everything else. And then on top of it, this element that you've touched on, which is we're not even requiring these companies that are listed on our stock exchange to, in any meaningful sense, pass the test that every other company has to pass. So, you know, we have given our enemy special access to American financing. We have made it as easy as possible. It is completely mad. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't think Chinese companies ought to be listed on the stock exchange at all. I don't understand why we're sending American money at all to invest in communist China. But good Lord, as a minimum, they certainly would have to pass the test, like in terms of standards. Who are these guys? Where's the money going? All the things that we require of everybody else at an absolute minimum. The idea that they have a privilege that we don't give to American companies. And look, you know, you talk about statements now made that we're going to try to hold their feet to the fire, or we're going to, you know, require them to be a little more meticulous. I mean, that kind of stuff with the communist Chinese is absurd, right? It's a waste of time. What are you talking about? Everything is fraudulent and everything is a lie. So what are you doing? You're just doing something for the appearance of it, and it has no meaningful impact at all.
There's a practice in Wall Street that people who are not listed, at least if they're Chinese communist companies, can still trade in our markets. So the number that are listed is relatively small, 250 or so, I think. The number that are traded there, including these so-called A shares, run to the thousands. But to your point, Sam, we are nuts that American companies, or for that matter other countries' companies, in terms of accountability, in terms of governance, in short, to try to assure that American investors are not simply defrauded by these people. That's the purpose for the body of our securities laws and regulations. How can it be that they're given a pass on having to apply all of those?
The immediate answer in regard to when Joe Biden assured that this would be the case was that there were massive amounts of Chinese money that were handed over, right? This is the guy who took his son Hunter with him on the famous, I think it was 2013 trip, and then Hunter somehow magically came back with, if memory serves, $1.5 billion in money from the State Bank of China. So, and unfortunately, I mean, in terms of allowing them to access or be traded on the stock exchange at all, the unfortunate truth is a lot of Americans are getting rich off of this, but what they're getting rich off is our demise. They are, you know, in the short term, they're buying another house and another yacht. In the not so long term, we're all going to pay the mortal price for this.
I think it's probably a fairly small number, actually, certainly compared to the number of people whose pension funds or mutual funds or exchange-traded funds or other, you know, rainy day college funds, whatever, are being migrated, at least in part, to communist China. And they will be impacted for sure if things go wrong. In fact, there's now increasing, evidence that they'll lose everything if we do, in fact, find ourselves in that shooting war that you say is increasingly what the Chinese Communist Party are preparing themselves to engage in. So, I mean, this is wrong on every level, and I guess I'm asking whether you would join me and I think our Committee on the Present Danger China, of which you are a very important member, in calling on Paul Atkins, the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, to exercise the 30-day and out notification to the Chinese that we're ending this sweetheart deal arrangement.
Without question. He should make that announcement today, and it should have happened a long time ago. And you're absolutely right. When I say a lot of people, I mean, what I mean is a group of individuals at the very top of our economy who have decided to climb in bed with the enemy. The average person out in small town America or Main Street America is getting screwed out of all of this, as usual.
Thank you. This is, as usual, the kind of clarity that we hope to bring to our conversations with Americans who, by and large, are not clued up about the nature of the threat we face, let alone how far it is metastasized, with our help. I'm going to get another perspective on this from another of our Committee on the Present Danger China members, an extraordinary, retired now, naval intelligence officer by the name of Captain James Fennell. He had, in his time in the service, a very prominent role as one of those warning about the threat that was emerging. Yes, the military threat, not least, from the Chinese Communist Party. He became the chief of intelligence and information operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet, the post from which he retired. And he has continued ever since to raise the alarm, both through a very important Google chat group, as well as through his writings, notably as co-author of a best-selling book, Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure, and his columns at American Greatness. We spoke with him also earlier in the week for our Securing America program, and we have an edited segment from that program, and we'll play it now.
Just as an American taxpayer myself, it irks me to hear the SEC chairman say that there's evidence that the Chinese are violating our rules. Essentially, they've been allowed to cheat and steal from Americans in our stock exchange that many of us invest in for our retirements and for our personal security. So that irks me, one. Two, we know companies like Temu and these other Chinese companies that bend the rules and get in under the regulation up until now, or if you sold something for less than $800 or $900, you didn't have to pay taxes. Well, everybody else is paying taxes. It's just another example of the cheating. So all this cheating's going on. It's stealing from Americans in that sense. And then on the other side, what happens with all that American money, that foreign direct investment that goes back to China, goes back to the Chinese Communist Party? Well, it goes into, in part, the People's Liberation Army. And I have witnessed, and you've witnessed, the largest military modernization program over the last quarter century by the PLA. And not just their PLA, but their Chinese Coast Guard, which is an arm of the People's Liberation Army, and their campaign to take territory that they claim is theirs, be it the islands in the South China Sea, be it the Taiwan, which is the big gem for them, or now what we've seen in the last month is they're focused on Japan and the Senkaku, and now even up into the Ryukyu Islands and even the Kuril Islands, supporting Russia and their claims up there. So what we're seeing is a communist party that has an ideology that stands 180 degrees against the American system, the American philosophy, the American belief in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They are against that in the sense that they believe in the power of the state, and the power of the individual is subservient to the state in all cases. And they are now able to export their worldview because they've received money, mostly from America, but from Europe and other places as well, that allows them to arm themselves and to be able to coerce other nations and threaten them with military force. And that's why we see the Chinese Navy is the largest Navy on the planet. It has the largest number of anti-ship cruise missiles, hypersonic cruise missiles. It's got, a growing number of submarines, aircraft carriers. Their third aircraft carrier was just commissioned here last month. A fourth one is on the way. There's reports today that a Chinese expeditionary strike group led by a Type 075 amphibious assault or landing helicopter LHD is gone into the Philippine Sea. This will be the first time ever that an expeditionary strike group, it's a 4-ship group, has gone into the Philippine Sea out of the South China Sea. They've already done that with their carriers over the last several years. They're operating on a daily basis. There's a report out today from Reuters that says there's 90 to 100 Chinese ships and Coast Guard vessels that are operating at sea right now today in the first and second island chains of the Western Pacific. When I retired 10 years ago in 2015, after 29 years in the Navy, the U.S. 7th Fleet was always the dominant naval force in the Western Pacific. And when you add in our allies like the Maritime Self-Defense Force from Japan and our allies from Australia or the Philippines, we were always the dominant, the West, the United States and our allies were always the dominant naval force in the Western Pacific. But because of the thievery that's gone on from the People's Republic of China, whether it's violating our SEC rules or stealing intellectual property or being just fed money from companies that are backed by the likes of Jamie Dimon and others that think that it's okay to give the Chinese Communist Party money, they are now in the position where they're the dominant naval force and they're able to coerce nations and threaten them to follow what they say. And they're going to do that to us. They're already doing it in the terms of what they've procured with the DF-26 ballistic missile that's designed to sink carriers, but it can also be used against Guam. They've got a whole plethora of air-launched from aircraft missiles that can hit Guam from bombers. They've got submarines that can attack Guam. They're putting their carriers out around Guam. So we have a risk now of U.S. military forces that are in Guam. Our military forces in Okinawa are certainly at risk. Our naval forces in Yokosuka and Tokyo Bay are at risk. Our carriers and the 7th Fleet's Destroyer Squadron 15 are at risk. So we have a lot of risk just in the Western Pacific. But I'm asking people to consider, 25 years ago, all the experts in D.C. said, oh, that'll never be a problem, don't worry about it. And it's now clearly a real problem for us in the Western Pacific. So ask yourself where it's going to be in 25 years. And I'm here to tell you, if you live in Honolulu, you're going to have a problem. And it may be, it won't be much longer to the West Coast. So we have fed them and given them money, and it's got to stop. And Americans can do it themselves by not buying their stuff.
Not buying their stuff and not investing in their companies, including the PLA ones. Another bracing presentation in terms of the actual impact of the financing that we've been doing. This is not a joke. This is not a drill. We are making possible and have been the largest military buildup in history, some claim, and that would be the Chinese military might that is being amassed for the purpose of, as Captain Pinnell said there in his closing comment, not just threatening our interests, our allies, our bases, our operations in the far Western Pacific, but in the Central Pacific as well. Areas that our friend Cleo Pascal has said on this program and elsewhere are the western frontier of the United States. Guam, most obviously, but the Confederation of the Northern Mariana Islands as well, and of course Hawaii. But then, in due course, inexorably, the United States itself, the continental United States, that is also going to be at risk. As will all of us, if the Chinese see the need to use that kind of power against us, the kinetic kind. We're going to take stock of all this with yet another distinguished national security practitioner. Another 06, as they call them, retired Marine Corps Colonel, Grant Newsom. Grant has the distinction, in addition to having served in uniform with, again, great distinction, having also been a foreign service officer in our embassy in Tokyo, as well as a businessman for many years in East Asia. And it was in particular in that last context that I wanted to have him contribute to this conversation because of his firsthand knowledge of what happens, what it means when American corporate titans, like those associated with Motorola, for whom he worked, make the decision, the insane decision, as Sam Faddis put it, to basically enable the Chinese Communist Party to destroy their companies, as well as enhance their ability to destroy everything else that we hold dear. Grant Newsom is also a very active contributor to the public policy debate. He is a senior fellow of the Center for Security Policy. He is an essayist and participates in innumerable interviews, as well as having authored a best-selling book of his own entitled When China Attacks, a Warning to America. We caught up with him as well for our show, Securing America, and I'm delighted to be able to present to you a portion of our conversation with Grant Newsom at this point via video. Thank you for taking some time to talk us through what's going on here as a result of some evidence that the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission is rethinking the kind of complete blanket support that his outfit has been giving to having Chinese companies, including some working directly for the People's Liberation Army, in our capital markets, getting our money to help them do bad things, possibly to us. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, I hope he does it. At least he's talking about it. Whether or not the chairman can actually get something done, I don't know. One has to be skeptical about it. I think his heart is in the right place, but he's going to find lots of opposition to doing something that is so sensible and common sense. No reason on earth why Chinese companies have been allowed to list on U.S. exchanges despite not meeting any of the requirements, any other just listed companies. It's companies that are registered to do business in the United States as well. And it is really just putting up a big sign and saying, you know, if you want to commit fraud and you're from China, come here. He's got an obligation to protect American investors, American citizens, and also an obligation to protect the nation. And by doing this, he is putting Americans at risk, and they've all been cheated, or will eventually. But he's also helped the Chinese military access U.S. capital markets to build up the People's Liberation Army, which is going to kill Americans. This should have been just revoked years ago. It should never have been allowed to happen in the first place. But here we are. Whether or not the chairman will be able to do what's necessary, I have my doubts. I hope he can. But this is something that should take about 5 minutes to figure out and to get rid of these companies and their access to the U.S. markets.
Colonel, what do you say to people who would have us trust these sorts of decisions, if not to the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, to people like Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan, or Brian Moynihan of Bank of America, or their counterparts that think it's just absolutely ducky to be putting our money into these Chinese companies?
Well, hang around Wall Street for a while and you will realize that the people there are motivated by one thing, and that is as much money as they can make themselves. You may think, well, how could it possibly be? They're at least patriotic. They care about American citizens. At best, they don't even pay them any attention. At worst, they hold them in contempt for not being smart enough to be the masters of the universe, to have gone to Wharton. And it is about that brazen, and it is that really just malicious. Actually, I remember one fellow commenting on it saying, about the top dogs, and he said, look, they would sell out their mothers if the price was right. And it sounds glib, it sounds excessive, but I really don't think it is. When you conduct IPOs for companies that, like Cattle, the Chinese battery maker, that is on the Department of Defense blacklist, as I recall, it has ties to the People's Liberation Army, and J.P. Morgan and Bank of America handled the IPO. The other day, another prominent firm helped a Chinese gold company get listed. I won't say their name. And the Congressional China Committee is going after them for that. So if there's money to be made, there's a type of American who will perform like a sea lion at say, SeaWorld that smells a mackerel snack. And it is about that bad. The amorality of these people is something that you cannot overstate. So leave it up to the businessmen, and you can imagine what's going to happen to the United States.
It's such an important point. The thing that is particularly stunning, and I wanted to draw on your personal experience with a company that was once known as Motorola, titan of American communications technology. Can you rely on them even to do the sensible thing for their own business interests, let alone the national interest? I mean, are they willing to sell out their mother or, their children, for that matter, even if it means the demise of their company?
Well, I think they're just not very smart, whatever it is. They get blinded by this illusion, the allure of the China market, for example, and think that it's just like doing business in Arkansas. What's the big deal? And I just think they're not very clever about it, and they, too trusting, just naive, and I think they're just, as I said, blinded. Motorola went into China with the encouragement of the United States government. Motorola did everything right, did what the Chinese Communist Party wanted them to do, handed over technology, know-how, set up operations there, and whatever they didn't give away was stolen, of course. But all they did was create their own competition, and it appears soon enough. And the ultimate objective of the Chinese communists when they invited Motorola in was to strip them of their technology, create rivals, and destroy them. They succeeded at that. But it's hard to imagine the naivety of business people. They just don't look at the political risk aspect, the nature of the market they're getting into, at least when it comes to China. Other places they do pretty well, but China, I think Westerners and, well, generically speaking, white men have been going insane over the China market for centuries. And how many of them have actually made any money there over the long term? I would suggest it's a very short list with maybe nobody on it.
You're muted, Frank.
Apologies. Colonel Newsom, thank you. You're the voice of hardened experience, as well as a veteran of hard experience, is incredibly valuable on precisely this point. We cannot rely upon corporate America to make decisions that are even in the interest of corporate America. Corporations, they run, let alone the national security of the United States. And I fear that that applies to those who are widely seen as captured regulatory agents in places like the Securities and Exchange Commission. I want to give some approbation to the current chairman for at least signaling that he's interested in coming to grips with the fact that this is not working out. What we have been doing, what we have been enabling, what we have been underwriting is fueling our demise and has to be subjected to corrective action. We are, of course, especially focused for this discussion, at least, on this 2013 Memorandum of Understanding. And to put a fine point on what Sam Faddis sort of alluded to there, it is worth noting that pretty much 6 months after that May 2013 Memorandum of Understanding was finalized with the active engagement of Joe Biden, he hived off to Beijing with his son Hunter on board Air Force Two. And when the official meetings were done, Hunter came back a few days later with something on the order of, as I recall, $1.2 billion of Chinese money to invest. Again, to invest for their benefit, not ours. I will leave to you to conclude whether that might have been a quid pro quo of some kind or not. But certainly on the basis of what we saw with Joe Biden in other settings, by some estimates, $32 million having been given to him by Chinese intelligence operatives. This may have been part of the deal as well. As we hope Chairman Atkins looks afresh at what needs to be done here, we canvassed some of our most important contributors for ideas. And I've got a list. Before we go to our final guest, who's deeply knowledgeable about the ways of Wall Street, having been one of its top performers, let me just read a few of these items. There's the matter of so-called variable interest entities. If you made any sense at all of what Paul Atkins was talking about with Maria Bartiromo in that discussion of companies that operate in China but have incorporated someplace else and get into our markets, I think he was thinking about VIEs, many of them chartered in the Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, rather, where they can operate with impunity and without transparency with respect to their mothership, let alone any accountability. We have the fact that U.S. asset managers have embarked upon joint ventures with Chinese banks, most of which are in deep financial trouble. We have the issuance facilitated by American banks of dollar-denominated Chinese sovereign bonds, means of essentially printing hard currency, to my way of thinking. We have A shares. I mentioned the difference between listing and trading. Many of the companies that are not listed but that are nonetheless traded are in the form of these A shares out of China. And there's essentially no transparency or accountability, no serious, rigorous assessment of their governance arrangements, for example, that are expected if American investors are going to be putting money into things on our capital markets. We have the Thrift Savings Plan, which opened up a mutual fund window a while back, and sure enough, the Chinese were able to get in to the pension funds of American government employees, civilian and military, as a result. We have a lack of risk exposure data about what is really on the line here with the Chinese. Some say maybe as many as 100 million American investors are exposed. Most of them, as I say, I think have no idea that that's the case. We have companies like Crane Shares, which had represented itself as an American fund manager operating on Park Avenue in New York City, which reportedly forced U.S. employees of the company to take an oath of allegiance, wait for it, to the Chinese Communist Party. Turns out to have been a Chinese enterprise, and it's now being subjected to lawsuits by at least one of those employees. We have the important issue of the U.S. index providers scarfing up things like these A shares, throwing them into their products, again, without any due diligence as to the nature of these companies, let alone their viability, and inducing American investors to think that, well, it's just an index fund which has got emerging markets in them, and what's to worry about if they are clued up at all. This is a short list of the kinds of things that the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Paul Atkins, if he is serious about scrutinizing what these Chinese companies are about, how they're operating, what it means in terms of risk to our investors, the kind of risk that the SEC exists, we're told, with those securities laws, with those regulatory actions to protect. And I'll just leave you with this last thought. This idea that, as Gordon Chang and Maria Bartiromo discussed, even companies that are blacklisted by the United States government, whether it's that 1260H list of the Defense Department or whether it's the entities list of the Commerce Department or whether it's the OFAC list or some other out of the Treasury Department, if it means anything at all, that there is a problem with them that warrants putting such Chinese companies on one or the other of those lists, in some cases multiple lists, it should mean that you not only can't do business with them, but you can't be keeping them in business by financing them. This would seem to be absolutely self-evident. And I would like to say right here, right now, that we call upon Chairman Atkins to take this list and act on it. Don't just pay lip service to the idea of scrutinizing what the Chinese are doing. Take action to stop them from doing this to the obvious detriment of our country as well as the investors involved. Well, to close this out, I couldn't be more pleased that we have with us a man who, as I said earlier, not only knows his way around the capital markets and Wall Street, he has been extraordinarily successful in specifically healthcare-related aspects of the industry, first with the Carlyle Group, of which he was a managing director for a time, and subsequently with his own operation known as NGN Capital. He oversees a $500 million worldwide healthcare venture capital fund, and he has been honored by the Wall Street Analyst Hall of Fame with the rank of number 15 out of 15,000. We're proud to call him a friend as well as a colleague. In addition to that important work, he has also been very much a freedom fighter, notably with his two enterprises, SaveTheWest.com, as well as Citizens for National Security. I had the privilege of addressing that group last weekend and was so impressed, as always, by not only the quality of the people involved in Citizens for National Security, but also for the leadership of the organization that Ken Abramowitz provides. Last but hardly least, he is the author of The Multi-Front War, Defending America from Political Islam, China, Russia, Pandemics, and Racial Strife. Ken Abramowitz, thank you for joining us and bringing your expertise in all of these areas to bear in our closing segment of this very important program. Over to you, sir.
Okay. As always, it's an honor to be with you, either in person or on your shows. I wanted to mention And thanks for all those nice things you said. I didn't even want to stop you. You know, if you want to say some more nice things, we could just wrap up with that. I actually had 6 conclusions that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention. Some relate to the financial markets and others to the general issue of U.S.-China relations. So, number 1 observation, China is at war with America, but America's not at war with China. We don't wake up every morning saying, oh, we're in a state of war with China, what should we do? The leadership of China wakes up saying, we're in a state of war with America, what should we do? So that's a problem. That's a mismatch of policies. Number 2, relative to the direct issue that you brought to our attention today, we 12 years or so ago allowed Chinese companies to trade and list on the New York Stock Exchange without matching the accounting standards of U.S. companies. Also, U.S. companies have other rules. They have to announce earnings quarterly. They have annual meetings, which anyone can attend if you're a shareholder. And people have a right to vote, even though they're a small piece of the capitalization of a company. They still have a right to vote for management. And these Chinese companies that don't meet American standards can also be incorporated in what we call ETFs, exchange traded funds. They're like mutual funds. And they all could be in various indices that Wall Street likes to have to measure various money managers against each other or against a standard. So this can be fixed in a month, and I don't know why it hasn't been fixed. One of the troubles President Trump has is there's 1,000 problems facing our country, and unless it gets to President Trump's desk, he's not acquainted with it. You can't be acquainted with 1,000 issues simultaneously when you're the president. Observation number 3, we don't recognize the 7 forms of warfare. For example, we recognize kinetic war, in other words, things blow up, and we recognize cyber. But we don't recognize chemical and biological as a direct form of warfare. The Chinese killed 1 million Americans with COVID and 1 million with fentanyl. We barely know that as a society. We don't recognize cultural warfare. All of us today, and everyone listening, we're all cultural warriors. We fight with our brains and with our words. We don't have uniforms. We don't shoot anybody. We are also facing economic war, which is the topic of the day, but we also have legal war and demographic war. There's some estimated 100,000 or 200,000, maybe more, Chinese of military age that snuck through our border. Where are they? Who do they work for? What nefarious ideas are they working on? So let me mention the 4th point. One of the reasons why we miss issues is we have no one person in charge. In a perfect world, since I think we're in World War III, we would have one person in charge of World War III, like a General George Marshall, I'm told, was in charge of World War II. And since we have 3 groups of enemies, which I color code red, green, and blue, the reds are the communists like China, Russia, greens, Islamists like Qatar and Iran, and the blue, the globalists like the UN, World Economic Forum, and drug cartels. We should have one person in charge of World War III, but under that one person, there should be one person in charge of the reds, one person in charge of the greens, and one person in charge of the blues. So the point I'm getting to is we don't have an organizational structure to understand the enormity of challenges facing us on those 3 fronts. And as a final point, if we had this proper structure, the conclusion would be pretty quick that we're underspending, I'll just guess, $100 or $200 billion. And it's not just military, it's not just ships, it's ammunitions, but it's all of the above, all the 7 forms of warfare. And the external relations with our enemies and internal within America, the relations with our enemies. So it's one of the reasons why Mamdani is mayor-elect of New York. If we had someone in charge of the Greens, well, he's both the red and the green and the blue, by the way. He's a trifecta of evil. Someone would have pointed that out to President Trump and stopped it. But that person didn't exist, and so therefore it didn't happen. So anyways, those are my key conclusions, and I try to do things in 5 minutes, and my 5 minutes is up. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your contributions, Ken, and for the discipline that you bring to presenting them. You are our only live guest, so the pleasure is mine to be able to continue this conversation a bit with you and maybe to tease out some of the things that you alluded to there. Ken, obviously, you are a man who knows, as I said, a lot about financial matters. You've worked with people at the highest levels of the financial sector, I think it's fair to say, and you've distinguished yourself as one of the best in the business. One thing that those of us who aren't, in that guy's thinking when they make decisions about investing in enemies of our country, People's Liberation Army tied companies specifically, or even, as you may have heard some of what Grant Newsom was talking about, they're essentially signing the death warrant for their own companies by getting into arrangements whereby they transfer their intellectual property, or they have it stolen, but it's accessible to the Chinese, and they will, in some cases, actually transfer wholesale their plants to China, or at least otherwise facilitate the buildup of the competitor that ultimately will destroy them. Can you give us an insight into what is going on in their minds? Is it nothing more really than personal aggrandizement and greed?
Well, I'll give you a couple of well-known quotes. Number one, follow the money. Number two, I believe Lenin had an expression that the capitalists will sell us the rope to us that we'll use to hang them, paraphrasing it. So when you're dealing with people who deal with money, in American corporations, I call money machines. They sell products, they sell services, they make money, they pay the employees, there's bonuses, there's stock options. Everybody wants the company to be bigger and more prosperous, and the shareholders want the company to shareholder for the price to go up. I mean, everybody involved in the company is rooting for the success of that company. Now, there's two successes that companies have, among others. One is short-term and one is long-term. So companies are supposed to balance the short-term and the long-term. And generally do that. In other words, they have to report earnings every quarter, but they also have an annual plan. They have a plan for next year. They have a vision for years 3, 4, and 5. So they want their stock options to be worth money. So they're balancing short-term and long-term, but sometimes they emphasize the short-term, because humans being humans, if you can make some extra money quickly, it's hard for money machines to turn down that opportunity. So I would say it's just human nature that people in companies, financial companies, any company, can't turn down opportunities. They very rarely use morality to stop themselves from doing bad things.
Yeah. And in a way, it goes back to what you said at the outset of your remarks, too, that China is at war with us, But we fail to recognize that fact, and we certainly don't think of ourselves at war with them, don't want to be, and for all intents and purposes aren't. Our friend Dr. Karen Sigeman has said on these programs in the past and elsewhere that, it's kind of like that old line about if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And she says, if there's a war underway and nobody sees it, nobody's aware of it, nobody's paying attention, can you still lose it? And I think the answer to both questions, of course, is yes. So Ken, when you're, again, counterparts in the financial space think about China, is it the case that they would say, we will only treat them as an enemy and thereby not do deals with them, not finance them, not otherwise enable them? If somebody in the United States government tells us that's the case, we're not going to give any independent thought to it. We're not going to apply any caution, perhaps for the reasons that you've just mentioned, unless, again, somebody in official Washington tells us that we have to, or makes it, in fact, a matter of law that they have to. And if the answer to that question is yes, what do you do about the fact that they've got these huge lobbying operations that are very purpose-built to try to prevent any kind of instruction like that from being handed down at the expense of their business opportunities?
Your point's well taken. Our government should declare war on China. The trouble is, when we declare war on someone, we only think in kinetic terms. So if the president announced war on China, people say, oh, who are we going to blow up? Where are the missiles? We have to buy more arms. But as we were discussing with the concept of unrestricted warfare, there's 6 other forms of warfare. And we don't know how to declare financial war on China and not military war, or not declare cultural war on China and or demographic war. We don't know how to do that. We don't even know we have 7 forms of warfare. The only thing we know is we have kinetic warfare and cyber, but we don't recognize the other 5 forms of warfare. So therefore, corporations will say, if I can, these multinational corporations, they invest in 100 countries. So China's the 2nd largest market in the world. So just pretend that I'm the president of some large company, and I announce I'm not going to invest in China. I know it's the 2nd largest market. I know it's fast growing. I know they need my products, but they're run by a criminal organization called the Chinese Communist Party. And I'm not going to be involved, because if I build a factory or sell products, they're eventually going to steal my property, steal my IP, make life difficult for me, not in the beginning, but in the longer term, and I'm not going to do that. And meanwhile, all of my competitors are investing in China. And the shareholders say, what's wrong with Ken Abramowitz? He's a lousy CEO. He's missing the whole opportunity of China. I'm going to invest in the 5 competitors they have, because they have CEOs who understand business better than Ken. So you see, there's also the competitive issue.
Yeah. At the risk of sounding disagreeable, and I think your point is generally very well taken, but I'm not even sure that most of us get the cyber warfare as a form of warfare. It's famously said that there are 2 kinds of companies that have been hacked and companies that don't know they've been hacked. So this is going on a lot. And I want to read quickly, Ken, something that our old friend Bill Gertz reported at the Washington Times about a hearing that took place earlier in this week on this point. And it featured comments that he was highlighting by a fellow by the name of Zachary Tudor, who is the Associate Director of the U.S. government's Idaho National Laboratories National and Homeland Security Science and Technology Director. That's a mouthful. And he made the following comments. He said, "Our nation is, quote, facing an unprecedented wave of cyber threats directed at our critical infrastructure. And that in addition to conducting cyber espionage to steal vital technology and information, China's government-linked hackers are pre-positioned to conduct cyber attacks on the electric grid and other critical infrastructure." And he talked about this Chinese hacking group called Volt Typhoon, which is specializing in, well, cyber warfare, as you would call it. And he said that they have been discovered on the basis of an attack that they did on our infrastructure, the grid and so on, in 2023 to have infiltrated U.S. utility networks with the goal of, quote, long-term positioning for disruption, unquote. And it goes on to this effect. But he said in conclusion, America's adversaries are not waiting. They are already embedded in our systems, mapping our infrastructure, and preparing to disrupt critical operations at a time of their choosing. The threat is no longer hypothetical. Cyber attacks on energy infrastructure are a daily reality and a growing strategic weapon. That suggests to me, Ken, that we're not taking seriously cyber warfare as a form of warfare. We're certainly not doing much to ensure that all of that infrastructure, including the grid upon which we, as you know, so critically depend, can survive this kind of operation against it. That underway now, let alone what happens at a time, as he put it, of their choosing. Your thoughts?
Well, I heard President Xi, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago, publicly say that we have a better form of government than the Americans have. Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to say to myself, what is he thinking about that? Well, they're a top-down society, so it's a dictatorship. So they see the whole picture very well, and they coordinate among their the 7 forms of warfare very well, and they put more resources here or there where they see the greatest opportunity. We are more of a bottom-up society, and so we don't. There's not many people who see the whole picture. We were just discussing financial organizations that just look at life from the financial point of view. Mm-hmm. Or there's a corporation, just a regular corporation, that gets hacked. And now suddenly they see cyber from the defensive point of view. They're not hacking Chinese companies. They just get hacked, and they call the FBI or someone like that, and they say, oh, I've been hacked. And they don't see the biggest picture. That's mm-hmm. why I said that we're not organizationally designed to fight World War III. Yeah. We don't have one person walking into the office saying, I'm in charge of World War III. Or you don't even have to use that word. You don't have one person who walks in and say, I'm in charge of worldwide coordination of all of our policies. Mm-hmm. Now, we have someone like that for domestic and someone for foreign. But we don't have one person who puts together domestic and foreign and sees the whole entirety of the mess. And
well, that's theoretically the job of the President of the United States, right?
Yes, that's right. It's the job of but again, the President of the United States has 1,000 things to do. Yeah. And so going back to the World War II analogy, if we pretend we went to go visit FDR and we asked detailed questions about World War II, he would say, I'm the President of the United States. I'm not in charge of World War II. I made the decision that we're going to prosecute World War II until unconditional surrender. Yes, I made that decision, but go see General George Marshall. He'll tell you about the war. Well, so President Trump actually has too many things to do. He's the President of the United States. He's in charge. He doesn't know this, but he's in charge of World War III. Also, he doesn't know that he's in charge of war with the Reds, war with the Greens, war with the Blues. And he's not cognizant of all the 7 forms of warfare. And he's not cognizant that the outside enemies are internal simultaneously. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't blame him. because of all the difficulties of being president, to prosecute World War III at the same time is beyond the abilities of any normal human being. And so I think that's why President Xi said we have a better form of government. Yes, because he's making all the decisions and he sees the whole picture and he's moving the pieces around on the chessboard or checkerboard, and we're not counteracting him. So yes, I can see why he thinks he has a better form of government.
Yeah. Well, the fact that he's running it, I think, is one of the reasons why he thinks that, of course. But I will tell you, as you know, Ken, I call it World War Z, and that moving around the pieces on, maybe it's the Go board rather than chess or checkers, is very much what he's about. We're out of time, but I can't help but ask one last question, if I may, Ken. Given your expertise in the healthcare business, you alluded to something that is also profoundly worrying. As you say, follow the money, but you might also say follow the mortality. And that it would be what has been done to this country through chemical warfare, especially in the form of fentanyl, and biological warfare in the form of COVID-19. You alluded to both, and the loss of life that they've taken here. Could you just say a further word about how the Chinese are almost certainly responding to the way that we have responded to those two forms of warfare they have waged against us with murderous effect?
Well, you remind me that during President Trump's first term, he publicly said, he never said, I don't think he said it twice. He just said it once. He says, we're going to sue China for $7 trillion. That's with a T. $7 trillion for compensation from COVID. In the next, 3 seconds later, the Chinese announced that if President Trump actually wants the $7 trillion, he's going to have to fight a nuclear war to get it. Mm-hmm. And so you can see how sensitive they were to that accusation, and it died down immediately, and no one said anything further about it. But President Trump was 100% correct, and but you can see we're not going to have a nuclear war with China to try to find $7 trillion of compensation. By the way, in that category of chemical and biological, I also include arson. So whenever there's a big fire, I always say, oh, were the Chinese behind that? Yeah. I know in Israel, when there's a big fire, the terror organizations are behind it. Generally. Not 95% of the time. So that's another form of warfare. Also, I hear stories of the 200,000 or whatever Chinese agents. I'm sure some of them are learning how to blow up dams. Well, that would be another form of unconventional weaponry.
Yeah. I'm so glad you've emphasized that. This is a subject to which we often return in this webinar series, is the presence in this country of people who, I mean, they may be honing their skills, but I'm pretty sure they came trained to blow up dams or engage in cyber warfare or use biological agents in these labs like the one they put into Reedy, California, for example, and probably have elsewhere. This simply underscores, Ken, both your own expertise in all of these matters, as well as the urgent need for the rest of us to become more knowledgeable about them and demand that our leaders, whether they're elected leaders, the President of the United States with all the things on his plate, second in command perhaps, who is managing all of these World War Z related problems, or otherwise, as well as appointed individuals like Securities and Exchange Commission Chairman Paul Atkins, we must insist that they become knowledgeable about the sorts of things we've discussed here and take appropriate action in response. It's not enough to simply be mindful of a problem. You have to act on it. And the Committee on the Present Danger of China exists to help not only raise the alarm, but also assist in thinking through the kinds of actions that need to be taken, as well as seeing to it that they are. I'll conclude with just one last comment. as we speak, I learned that the United States National Defense Strategy, I believe it's called, has now been released. I'm told there are some 21 or more references to China in it, and that, at least according to our great friend Captain James Fennell, the treatment of China is seemingly fairly robust, which we're grateful for. We'll probably get to that topic in our next meeting, and I hope that all of you, if you haven't already subscribed to this webinar series at presentdangerchina.org, that you will do so without fail, because you're not going to want to miss that program and those that will be coming. Plus, take advantage of the incredible body of work that we have created over, as I think, 220 of these programs over the past couple of years. And once again, as always, I want to thank our colleague Oleg Atbashian, who is incalculably important in making all of this possible. And of course, those who contribute to the content as well. In this case, our friends Gordon Chang, Maria Bartiromo, I'm going to thank her especially because of the incredibly important work that she does with her program day in and day out, and especially her specials on underwriting the enemy. Also, of course, Captain James Fennell, Colonel Grant Newsham, Sam Faddis, and our very special friend, Ken Abramowitz. God bless you all, and God bless America.